everyone check their volume on their computer just to make sure that we're not
Progress.
interchanging. So we'll just wait for a few of our board members. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we officially call this meeting to order. Good afternoon, everyone. This is my first in-person meeting, so it's nice to see all of you face to face. And I just have this tendency in in-person meetings to have a quick round of introduction of the people who are at the table for our own benefit and for those who may be listening and watching. So I'll start on my right with Mr. Beck.
I am Jay Beck, and I work for the Finance Authority of, I can't even say it, Finance Authority of Maine.
Welcome.
Caroline Pryor, and I am with Zero Energy Homes.
Crystal West, Maine Forest Gardens Council. David Joanne, professional lighting contractors from the Northeast.
Matt Finn, recently retired.
Sarah Littlefield with me there, promotion board.
Jeff Holovitz, Tofu. Craig Lapine, I'm not on the board, but I'm staff, and I'm the director of the back.
Every partner saying not on the board, but director. Sarah Hawkins, not on board. Director of economic. Hi everyone, Emily Horton, I'm the director of policy and community engagement at the department here today.
Director of the Community Association and Liberation Party.
I'm Nicholas Lindholm, work with Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association.
Michelle Webb, also not on the board, but Director of Agriculture Research Development. Brooklyn Bulldog, Office Admin for DSA.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Lily Kenny. I am the coordinator for the fund.
And I'm Craig Hickman. I am proud to be the co-chair of this robust group of intelligent people who are going to advise the department on this very important fund. Our agenda today is pretty intense. We're going to have a presentation from Emily Horton to discuss the bonding process. And then we're going to make sure that at the end of the meeting, we have some consensus about the key decisions for the round 1 of funding. And then we'll identify next steps to finalize rules and launch the first request for application. But before we get into all of that, we know that we need another co-chair because as the legislature gets underway in January, I'm not always able to be here. And there has been some discussion. No one has volunteered to join the co-chairmanship except for Sarah Littlefield. So I was wondering if we could have an official nomination by someone on the board for Sarah Littlefield to be co-chair of this board.
I will nominate Sarah Littlefield.
Sarah, would you care to say a little bit about why you'd like to have this role?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? It was just very wrong.
That's okay. Could you just say a little bit about why you'd like to be in this role?
Oh, I don't know that that's really what, how it goes, that like, I just know that there needs to be someone, and I am familiar with running a board meeting, as an executive director of the board. I also serve on several other boards, so happy to be the person that sits in the seat when you're not there to fill it.
Thank you. Are there any board members online? I didn't ask that question.
Commissioner.
The
Yes,
commissioner, yes.
I think there are a couple
Commissioner
of
Beal,
us.
good to see you. I hope you're feeling better. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Leanda Beal. I'm the commissioner of the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, Forestry, and I was so looking forward to being with you all today, but I have a cold of some sort, and I didn't want to give it to you all. So sorry to miss being in the room with you all. And the vocals are a little bit, the audio is a little hard to hear, so I'm going to go try to find some headphones because I think that might improve things on my end. So I'll be right back.
Yeah, I'll just remind board members, we don't have a microphone in the room. And so when you speak from your diaphragm and open up those vocal cords so that the folks who are listening in can hear us to the extent possible. So if there are no discussions of the motion to invite Sarah Littlefield to be the co-chair of this board, all those in favor, please indicate in the usual manner. It is unanimous. Thank you, Sarah. And we'll be having meetings offline. Any questions from anyone before we get started? Without further ado, I will turn this over to Emily Horton, who will do a presentation for us on bonding. You're welcome.
Jeremy, turn on my audio.
Sure.
Okay. Perfect. Can everyone hear me online? Tom, Gordon, can you give me a thumbs up?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, great. I don't want to talk too loud in front of my speaker, but I also want everyone here to hear me. So just let me know if you can't hear me and I can slow down. Thank you, Lily, for inviting me to come speak today. My name is Emily Horton. I'm the Director of Policy at the department. I can get into my introduction in a minute, but I was asked to come and speak on the department priorities this legislative session. One of those priorities being a bond, a department bill, a bond to fund ag and forestry sectors. So typically, we would meet with people and talk through our department bill, but I think for this conversation, I'm going to do some of that. But I think what's most important and my hope coming out of this is that everyone here has an understanding of the process, a little bit of the legislative history of why you're all here today. I'm sure maybe you've gone over some of this already as a board, but really understanding what the process is to get involved and to share your voice in the legislature and to understand where the department's coming here. So I know a lot of people in the room. I know a lot of you, including your chair, can probably talk about these things in their sleep, but there's a lot of you that I don't know. And so my hope is that everyone has a basic understanding of kind of the process and ways to get involved as it impacts this board and the work that you do. So just a quick introduction, and you have packets in your, you have this agenda in your packet, but I am the legislative liaison for DACF, so I work closely with the state legislature, the congressional offices. Each state agency has a legislative liaison that works really closely with interagencies. I track all of the bills, so I work on testimony, I work on policy for the department, but also anything that is introduced that impacts DACF, I track and work on. The Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry Committee, which your chair, Senator Hickman, has served on for many, many years, is our committee of jurisdiction. DACF is a big department. We have 4 bureaus: the Bureau of Agriculture, Food, and Rural Resources, the Maine Forest Service, Parks and Lands, and the Resource Information and Land Use Planning. So I'm just saying that to give you a little context that we are a big department. There's a lot of cross-cutting issues. We testify in at least 10 different committees, testify on over 100 bills. That number is going up each year, but there's just a lot of really important issues and cross-cutting issues, including the work that you do here. So just a quick background. So we are in the 132nd session, going into the second, the short session. And the special session adjourned on June 25th. So a lot of the bills became law at the end of September. As of May 25th, so I'm just giving you all a little taste because I don't know what your level of understanding some of this work is in the legislature. So as of May 25th, I track all of the committee reports. There were just under 2,000 bills introduced in the legislature last session. As of adjournment on June 25th, there were 416 bills carried over. So what that means is that Senator Hickman and other legislators were very busy the last month between May 25th and June 25th, reporting out almost 2,000 bills. So there are 416 bills that have carried over. we're going to talk about how that connects to the ag and forestry bond in a second. A lot of those carryover bills were bonds. There are also 64 bills on the governor's desk that is not included in this number. Does anyone have any questions about that before I move on? Just keep moving on. So this, how many of you are familiar with kind of the history of the board and how the legislature went about it? Just curious if this has been discussed. I know some of you are. Good. Well, this was my best shot at putting it on paper and trying to like think through the bills that have passed and the budget language. And I guess my point with this is that for many, many years, people have been working on getting this board set up, getting it staffed, and getting it funded. Starting in 2021, LD 1565 was introduced to the ACF committee. And the language actually passed through the budget that year, which was LD 1733 at the time in the 130th. So that the language was created, the program was created in the statute, but there was no funding or staff attached to it. So in the coming years, in 2023, LD 16.7 was introduced by the same sponsor, Senator Talbot Ross. I want to give her credit here. 20 million was asked in that bill and supported in the ACF committee. And the ACF committee, I would say, has been supportive of funding this program year after year. The hiccups have been once it gets out of the committee and into the appropriations. And so the 20 million obviously was not successful, but 500,000 was. And it's my understanding that is what the board currently has today. And in 2024, again, LD 22 was introduced again to get more funding and this time to really advocate for staffing. The commissioner has and others have always advocated to run a thorough program. There needs to be staff to help support that. That bill, because of the way the legislature adjourned that session, it died upon a conclusion. So we were not successful. Fast forward to last year in 2025. Again, there were a number of bonds introduced, which I'll talk about. Ongoing budget advocacy. There were lunch and learns. A lot of stakeholders here today helped prepare a lunch and learn for legislators to talk about the board and reasons for funding it. And then luckily, there was USDA funding partnering with CEI to get staffing, which is why we're so lucky to have Lily today. But it's my understanding that the staff still needs ongoing funding through the general fund. So as a board, I think that's really important to know that we need ongoing staff through the general fund. So these were all the bonds. I'm not going to go through them, but just the bonds that DACF testified on. There were more bonds, but these are the ones that DACF testified on. There were 2 bonds focused on agriculture infrastructure. LD 1739 was Representative Pluker, the chair of ACF, and LD 1140, the Senate President's bond. Before I jump into the specifics of what we're proposing, I just wanted to flag this link, and it's in the handout. There's a nice overview of the bond process. And my role is kind of at the beginning stages with this department bill, drafting policy, getting it introduced, working with committees and testimony. Getting the 2/3 vote is really important for bonds. But if you look at the handout, it shows all the other, after the bond, if it's approved by the legislature, if it's approved by voters, by the majority of voters, it then goes primarily to the state treasurer and the governor's office and DAFs, figuring out the length of time and the payment parameters of the bond. So if you have more questions, I would encourage you all to check out this website or the handout on the bond process. And I'm sure there's others here that could probably speak to bonding. Yeah, yep. You could probably have your own presentation just on that, actually. So just jumping up to our department bill and where we are today. So like I said, there were 2 bonds introduced related to ag and the fund last session. We worked with both of the sponsors, Representative Pluker, Senator Talbot Ross, other stakeholders in the legislature on amending those bills. They all had public hearings. We were really hoping to have a work session with the amendment. That never happened. The legislature adjourned. And so moving forward to next session, we feel strongly that there still deserves more of a public process and more conversation, which is why we've decided to put in the amendment that we were working on, to put it in as a department bill this session so that we can have a public hearing. There's a lot of voices that were not at the table. There were a lot of conversations had, but they were, side conversations, not public conversations. And we know there's going to be feedback on what we're proposing. So we introduced our amendment to the revisor's office this fall, using a lot of the data that we already have currently. We were approved by the governor's office to our cap at $40 million. And the governor's office is looking at kind of total bonding packages coming out of the state. So this is one bond, but there's kind of a cap of like what we can bond, how much. So we got the green light to ask for 40 million. We're focusing on existing programs, and I think this is really important. You can't use bond funding for administrative, staffing needs. And so really focusing on programs that already have staff, already are existing. And then of course, utilizing a lot of the data and gaps that we've already had. So a lot of the work that Claire has done here, the 18 million in CARES funding, the 20 million ARPA funding. We have a lot of data in terms of the needs and gaps. There's also been a lot of legislative efforts, the Dairy Task Force recommendations, the Natural Working Lands recommendations, most recently the federal USDA disaster funding that was allocated to the Northeast states. We had to do more outreach and surveys to collect some of that data. So all of that is, what we're using to form our proposal, which is essentially this. And again, this is the draft is in your handout, but 24 million to the fund, the program. 12 to forestry, and 12 to agriculture. And then the other programs, 4 million for the Farmers Drought Relief Fund, 4 million for Healthy Soils, 5 million for the Working Farmland Access Protection Program, and 5 million for the Dairy Improvement Fund. I think we could take a lot of time talking through all the details here, but again, I'm just trying to give you all a sense of what we're proposing and the process. There's going to be a public process end of January, but I'm also happy to have conversations after this meeting with folks. The department wants to have feedback. We are having conversations currently, so my guess is that some of what we're proposing will likely change. This is just the beginning.
Oh, yeah. So I don't know if this is your fault, but there's a discrepancy here on your slides. It says 5 million to the Dairy Improvement Fund, and in this draft, this is 3.
Let me check. It's whatever's in the actual language. That's, yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that's just incorrect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for checking that out. So just the key bond features, these are actually some of the language I pulled. So a lot of that, like I said, advocates have been doing a lot of work in the legislature, stakeholder groups, and these are some of the reasons why they're supporting it. From my position at DACF, I think this fund is really unique. It's one of a kind. At DACF, there's no other vehicle to fund farm and forestry through grant or loans. There's nothing like it. So this is really important. And last slide, I believe, just again highlighting the public process. So we've put in this proposal. It will come back from the revisor's office. We will have to find sponsors. We're really focusing on again, getting 2/3 of votes in the legislature, which can be tricky for bonds. I think you need to get 2/3 in both the Senate and the House. So that's 20 in the Senate, 24 in the Senate, and 100 in the House. So you need that. And then, of course, if it passed the legislature, you still need the majority of the voters. So, so the hearing will be end of January, February, depending on how the legislature runs. You can testify in person. You can submit testimony online. You can reach out to your local representatives. And then after the hearing, they will have work sessions on bonds, likely report out. This is where a lot of changes can be made during the work sessions. They will likely report out, the bonds at once. And then again, the House and the Senate has to vote on these packages. And that's another time to get involved in the process too, reaching out to your representatives. And that,
Do you
yeah.
see the advisory board's role? What is the methods? What are they?
Well, I mean, I think that's a discussion for the board. I mean, as representatives of organizations here, as individuals, that's one thing. And that's why I'm encouraging you all to be aware of the process and speaking with your own memberships and stakeholders on whatever you see. Like I said, this is one bond vehicle, but there's a lot of other bond vehicles in the conversation right now. But as a board, that's a separate conversation. Any other questions? I know that was a lot and can be really boring for some people, really interesting for others. So
Emily, on the timeline of this proposed bond, would we be looking, if everything goes well, a year from now, it would be before the public as a
yes,
Okay.
yeah, following November. It would be- Mhm. Yep.
And then that's just the approval of the bond by the voters, and then there's still a process after that. Mariah,
I guess.
and welcome, thank you for being here in person.
I guess this might be a rudimentary question, but when would money get to farmers?
Like again, no earlier than the beginning of 2027.
Yeah,
No earlier than that, and I'm not sure how long after that it would take if the bond were approved. Once it goes to the treasurer's office and government, and when the money comes from.
Mhm.
That's the part of it that we don't know,
but
no earlier.
yeah, but luckily, like there's a functioning board now. There's staff for it. You're setting up the parameters, which will be ready. You'll be in a better place by that time. Yeah. Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you would have to approve that board. What applications are coming in once this is fully capitalized? And be hopeful that would be. And Emily did say it, but bonds are always tough if you're borrowing money. And there are ideological concerns around that across party lines. And the next year, obviously, is an election year, so it even makes 2/3 votes tougher to get. But I would say that there is support in theory amongst members of both sides of the aisle. This is a really important bond for people to have an opportunity to approve, especially since we know our food infrastructure is going to be more important than ever. And we face all of these cutbacks, which we'll talk about later, but. So it's just our opportunity to take care of ourselves. In a real way.
Alright, I found another typo, Emily. It is not your fault this time. It's a typo in both things, but forestry is missing a 0. However, I do have another question that's beyond just the typo. Did you say that there is a time where there'll be a hearing, or that hasn't been, that hasn't been set yet?
That has not been set yet. Once the legislature convenes again in January, there will be a public hearing.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, all bills get a public hearing in their respective committees or
Yeah.
jurisdiction.
Mhm.
There's a few sections that-
Mm-hmm.
But it is determined by the chair. The schedule when you go right in. Director.
I guess I just wanted to put an or in here to say, because the staff is, is trying to be very supportive of the board, hopefully you feel supported. But when it comes time, so the department is gonna be taking a position on this. We are not gonna have an opinion on what the board does, and we're not gonna encourage an opinion on what the board does, so you will all figure out if the board is gonna take a decision, but the department will be doing one thing policy-wise, and the board is a separate entity.
Yeah, just to be clear, as a department, this is a department bill that's approved by the governor as well and the administration. This is the only bond proposal that's going in the second session from the administration, which is a really good sign. Well, it's a good sign that we're being supported, that this is a department bill.
Okay, am I allowed to talk?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I think it might be worth just clarifying for the group that it's capitalization through a bond instrument is really interesting because it's a one-time injection of quite a lot of money, right? And when we see similar permanent fund models like Vermont Working Lands, I saw Amy somewhere. Hi, stop me if I'm wrong at any point. Like Vermont Working Land, I think is capitalized through a recurring annual Vermont state legislative allocation. Is that correct? So they get a tranche of money every year and it might change depending on what's in the budget that year. This is a little different wherein we're getting a larger sum of, theoretically, getting a larger sum of money up front. But I do think there's precedent for public and quasi-public funds. I'm specifically thinking of a few at the Maine Technology Institute that have iterative bond funding, like the Maine Technology Asset Fund is now on version 3.0. So they've done 3 runs of that particular funding opportunity that has gotten bond funding a number of different times. So I think there's a question embedded in here for Emily, which is, are we correct in thinking that capitalization through a bond is really kind of a one and done thing, or is there a mechanism for recurring capitalization we should be thinking about?
I think you should be thinking about all of them
Yeah.
as a board. I mean, you can see with the legislative history that it has been challenging to get funding through the general fund. And so we are trying through a bond, but we need general fund for ongoing staffing needs. So I would say all of the above.
I have a question from online. Someone asked me what happens if it was just to me, what happens if the bond doesn't get passed?
The commissioner might be want to speak here, but I know the department will continue to advocate. I know supporters, stakeholders, legislators will continue to advocate for funding through other, through state, federal, private ways, but.
Yeah, hello, everybody. I'm so sorry I'm late. I tried to hop on Zoom and I couldn't find it, so I'll spare you the detail of why. But I just wanted to say, so the general fund is a big lift, but there are several bills that are tagged to this fund that are in appropriations on the table that could be advocated for this time. And then people are talking about Vermont, and that has had bond fund, and it has people go for reauthorization. There's been strong bipartisan support every time because they've demonstrated really structural change. And then like Massachusetts, that all started with a big bond. And then they've gone for reauth. The legislature has funded based on what they did with that bond and how impactful it was.
Yeah, the legislature is the power of the purse, and it can do what we call baseline funding for a program or department. Some people here may be familiar with Maynard's Food Maynard's, which a few years ago, the legislature decided to fund at a baseline ongoing in the budget. So I think it's $1 million. And every year, that money is allocated to the Good Shepherd Food Bank to administer that program. And so if there's success, even with a one-time infusion of a lot of money, and people can see that it's really important for us to do this without borrowing money in the future, it can just be something that the legislature and or a future governor decides to put in the baseline budget of any amount, just to make sure that there's ongoing infusion of money for, especially for staff, because that's what these come from, their own fund line. So. Commissioner Bill.
Yes, great discussion. I would just add that
We
there's
cannot hear
another,
you, Commissioner. I think you might be muted on your end.
I don't appear to be.
There you are. Now we hear you.
Okay, great. I was just going to say that there is another example that I think it's worth the board knowing about, which is the Land for Maine's Future program, which has been funded over the course of a number of years in different ways.
Yes.
And so there, primarily we've seen bond funding, rounds of bond funding. Sometimes it's a small amount, sometimes it's as much as, $30, $40 million, I think. But there are other times where there have been general fund appropriations when we've had the money. And I think really the lesson to take from the LMF program is that that's a program that has a lot of supporters, a lot of public support. And I think that that is what has helped to keep it at the forefront and for there to be creative thinking over time as to how to continue to fund that program. So I think one of the jobs we'll have, if we can get more funding at whatever level, we just have to keep building the successes and telling the stories and making sure people understand what we're able to catalyze with funds through this program. And hopefully that will provide other opportunities in the future for funding from whatever direction it comes in.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions or thoughts, concerns about this process of getting money into this program for us to be able to do our work better? Okay, thank you, Emily, for that overview of the history of the timeline of how we got here. And the bonding process is what it is. We are a little ahead of schedule, but we're not going to take a break. I'm just going to turn this right over to Lily to talk us through the review of funding options and options for innovation that we will hopefully come to some consensus about by the end of this meeting today. So Lily, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Senator. I am going to just bear with me as I figure out how to share my screen. What do I do? Will I go like this?
Share the screen. You did share there?
Brooklyn, help me. Oh, there we go.
Screen
Thank
over
you.
here. Let's share.
All right, here we go. I think this is it. Okay, and then I need to go like this. Okay, wow, it worked, guys. All right, well, hi, everybody. I want to thanks to the senator for chairing us today and for Emily for that very interesting presentation on the bond process. I think it's definitely something that the board will need to talk about in subsequent meetings. That it definitely is something that will be sequenced and it's not immediate. So we have time to talk about it, but I think it also helps us think of our timeline of when we're going to be fully capitalized. So in the meantime, we do know, as Emily mentioned, and as we all know, that we do have 500,000 that is currently available for us now. Last meeting, we talked a little bit about what can we do with that 500K. Is that enough to set up a revolving loan fund right away? Seemed to be with consensus, and after talking to our experts who are within our financial institutions and also in the department and others, it's really doesn't seem to be enough to even cover overhead costs to make that a viable option. But it doesn't mean we cannot not build what our revolving fund could look like someday. It just would be something that we do slowly over time when we're fully capitalized. So today, what I'd like us to talk a little bit is just to have discussions. First I'll present, then we'll have a small group that's a mixed sector group, and then we'll come back and come to consensus on basic grant structure and kind of the size. I wanted to discuss some ways that we can still be innovative. How can we leverage funds with grants? I think small grants can be really catalytic and helpful, but there also are needs when it comes to infrastructure that are going to need more money than a small grant. So how could this grant be part of a small business's financial stack, right? So it's not going to, it might not be an entire project, but how could it contribute to someone's kind of financial wallet or envelope? And then we wanted to just, again, I just wanted to quickly review and confirm eligible entities, project types. Are we forgetting anything, or do we need to take anything away? And then we'll, as I mentioned, we'll break into the small groups, and then we'll come back together for some consensus. So really what I got out of the last meeting is that there was agreement that we should have general grants. We talked over time about having different tiers, like very small grants or micro grants or large grants. But what I heard at the last meeting from the advisory board was to say just having one tier up to there was some discussion whether it should be 50,000 or 25,000. So that's something that I heard. You know, we do know that you know, the bigger the grant, the less grant you can do. And some people may want larger grants, some people may want smaller grants. So, you know, is 50,000 the cap that we're looking for? Do we want to just pilot lots of smaller kind of micro grants? And then this goes into what I wanted to talk about too. Could we use a set aside for your general infrastructure grants and then allow for grants to be used for kind of innovative uses? For example, we're talking about an interest buy down. I don't know if we can do that right away because it's complicated. I think that's something we could pair with a revolving fund. But there is, we were talking about potentially doing like a down payment match grant or something, some sort of grant that could be offered as collateral for people that are loan ready, but maybe not down payment ready. So I'll discuss that in a subsequent slide. So really quick, what a 200,000, if we set aside 200,000 or 300,000, but I just did 200,000 just for us to discuss here. Just to see, we could do like a couple of like about 4 larger grants of 50. We could do 8 at 25. You know, we could do some at 15. We could do a lot at 15 or 10. And I just gave some examples. And it may not be a full, you know, we may be able to offer 50,000 towards somebody's project. It may not be the full project, but it could be something that we contribute to. So this is very general. We know that this is infrastructure. It's for underserved populations. Those are people that have difficulty. They have barriers accessing capital. So they're for folks that are rural, low socioeconomic, communities of color, indigenous communities. So this is really what we've been talking a lot about. So if we set aside 200,000 for standard grants, it could look like this. It doesn't have to exactly be this mix, but it's just an example. And then I am still I want to use this time as a way to leverage funds. This 500,000 is a way to kind of not just be constrained by 500,000. So I was talking with Claire and a few other folks, like, what if we were able to do a down payment grant? That would mean we would have to work with probably a CDFI, a community development financial institution, where we could match someone's collateral. So if somebody needed to was looking for a loan of 200,000, could we contribute to their down payment? So that really unlocks more funding. So folks that need more than a small grant could still benefit. And so who could this help? As I mentioned, I think there are people that we all know in small businesses that maybe they're ready for a loan, but they just don't have the collateral yet. Could we help them with that? So I was thinking we could also, this is for discussion, set aside an amount of money to kind of test this tool, but also unlock more funding in a way with our 500K. So this is kind of what I was playing around with, how a down payment grant could work. So we could, let's say there's a sawmill upgrade, or we wanted to work with a food processing facility, or et cetera, et cetera. Basically, is there a way that the borrower could contribute up to half of the down payment, and then we have a grant that does the other half. Or if it's some other type of loan, I know sometimes CEI does loans where they need collateral. It's not always cash collateral, but it's something. Could we become that match? So that's a way to unlock loans for stakeholders or for applicants that need more funding now. So we still have regular infrastructure grants, but this is another set aside that would allow folks to be loan ready faster. So just an option. We do need to confirm, again, the proposed eligible entities. So I added, in the small groups, I'd like you to take a look and discuss this a little bit more. What are we missing from this list? I won't read it out, but you can take a look at it and think about, is there something that's not spelled out there that needs to be spelled out? Is it too spelled out? Is it too detailed? And something that we haven't, I don't know if this happened before I joined, but has there been discussion around aquaculture and marine-based food businesses? So that's something that would be helpful for you to discuss in your small groups as well. If that is something that's on the table, or is this really for kind of land production, which would be agriculture and forestry? And then again, for eligible projects, these are examples of what grant funds may address. So again, this is not exhaustive, but it's, I think, some examples that we should double take and review, and to say, well, no, it really shouldn't be used for professional or business services tied to infrastructure projects or something. So if the small groups could take a look and discuss. And then one area that's another innovative way, I do think it's important for AFPIF to be responsive to the times. What is happening in our current economy that is affecting our stakeholders? So right now, I think that we have heard from a number of small businesses, tariffs are starting to affect them, especially those that were buying equipment, maybe from Europe, specialized equipment. Is there a way that we could allow an eligible cost be tariff mitigation? So I know some people's tariffs are, like the tariffs are causing hundreds of thousands of cost increase. We don't really have that right now, but even we could say, if you have an infrastructure project that became a lot more expensive, could we mitigate it through a grant? So that's something I'd like us to discuss in the small group as well. So we'll take a look in the small groups and discuss that more. And then the other area that we wanted to talk about today was technical assistance. And so far in all of the meetings that we've had, I've heard technical assistance discussed in a few different ways. I've heard, and it's also in our statute as well. So I have heard technical assistance be for applicants, making sure that they are appropriately kind of going through the checklist. Are they writing their narrative to explain what they're doing? You know, and then there could be technical assistance for actual participants in the grant or loan program, and they may need support with kind of reporting. So that's kind of one type of technical assistance. Then I've also heard there is technical assistance for the actual project. Perhaps somebody got a new piece of equipment and needs technical assistance on how to use it correctly. I think we've all seen projects where people have gotten new equipment and just through maybe a lack of training or understanding, it didn't always work out. So the way we can envision technical assistance for AFPIF is, I think, in three different ways. There's your basic standard department support. That's where I come in. That's where the department comes in, where we can make sure we're answering emailed questions. We go through we talk with the applicants. We have listening sessions, etc. But I would like us to think about, which we've talked about before, a dedicated technical assistance funding, and this would have to come from the AFPIF pool. And so this is where we could set aside funding where we can hire a consultant just for the application phase maybe, or for certain times of the life of the project for one-on-one coaching. If somebody needs language translation, they could request it. So it would kind of be supplied by demand. It wouldn't just be technical assistance that's always there, but we could make sure that maybe for every applicant, we have 2 to 4 hours of TA set aside for them. That's just so that we can even the playing field. It also builds capacity. It's not even wasted if the person doesn't get the grant, because it's building the capacity of that applicant for next time so that they'll be more prepared the next time they apply for a grant or a loan. And then, of course, for the TA that would be as part of the infrastructure project, that would have to be a line item in somebody's application. So I'm applying to get this new equipment that's going to improve my production. And one of the things I know is I'm gonna have to train my staff how to use it. That would actually be a line item in someone's budget and application. So this would be helpful if in our small groups, we could discuss that as well. So once we get your feedback, we'll discuss in the small groups. We'll come back and kind of discuss in the larger group. And then I think Craig will ask you to kind of lead through a consensus, if you will. And then what the board advises will be adopted in our rules, as I talked about at the last meeting, and the request for application, the RFAs or proposals, either one. And again, it will be iterative. This isn't a like make your decision now or forever hold your peace. We'll have time to change and adjust and make sure that we get the advice and direction from the board as well. And eventually with the rules in addition, so there's public comment for the board, but the rules will also have public comment as well. We'll also have listening sessions at different trade shows coming up. We can talk about if you have suggestions of where else and how else we can do listening sessions for your stakeholders. That's also very helpful to us as well, so that we can make sure that we get being as inclusive as possible when we're designing this. So I randomly generated breakout groups. And this is what my randomized list looked like. So it's completely random. For folks that are online, I thought you could have your own online breakout group where you could talk amongst yourselves.
I don't see anyone online.
There's just Brittany and the commissioner.
Oh, Brittany, yeah.
Or we could bring the laptop, Commissioner Beal, and have you virtually join us as well in one of the groups. So we'll have Michelle facilitate one group, Craig Lapine and myself facilitate another group. And I thought we could kind of just drag our chairs to the corner. You can grab an extra piece of cake or get some coffee, and we could kind of really break into these ideas. If somebody has another idea that's innovative and something they think it's important to try, please feel free to offer it. And then we'll come back as a larger group and we'll discuss as a big group.
So there are bathrooms at the end of the hall.
Yes.
If anybody needs that. Probably take about 5 minutes to get into our groups, either in
Yeah.
this room or in the hallway or outside. I mean, you meet where you want. And we'll take a half an hour for the groups because we're a little ahead of schedule instead of 25
Yeah.
minutes, which will make sure we have a pretty robust conversation in our respective groups. And so we're kind of on break, but moving into our groups. And so we will come back together, I'm gonna say at 1:55.
Yeah.
How's that?
1:50.
So they'll come back together at 1:55.
Again,
There
thank
we
you,
go.
Tom. A little bit later than what we had originally discussed, but we were having really good discussions in our small group. So I will hand it over to Senator Hickman.
Thank you. So thank you all again for participating in these small groups. There have been robust conversations. We're kind of back on schedule. And so we'll go in the order of the groups for a little bit first, feedback from each facilitator. And then we'll figure out a way to come to consensus on what we want this designed to look like for our funds. So Michelle? Hi.
My notes are not written in the order of the slides, but in order of our conversation. So recommendation on forestry eligibility, which is the in-plan model in the categories.
Can you speak, and just speak really
Yeah,
loud?
speak really loudly.
So, looking at how to break down the forest product, sector. So there's an in-plan model, to look at that. And we have notes about what all of those subsectors of forestry were. Recommendation to revise the framing of the down payment match grants. Less of a match, because the 50% match wouldn't be collateral. It would be instead a cash injection to unlock access to loans. The risk is different for those. There's some notes about that. Our group is recommending that aquaculture and marine are not included in this pilot rounds because they were not at the table to form and give input about what their needs and challenges and all of that are, but certainly strong consideration for inviting that group, certainly part of the main food system in the future. So we talked a bit about loggers and viewing this tool for logging contractors. But just with the understanding that, you know, the total amount of funds available in this fund wouldn't even pay for one logging cut. So the group was talking about should maintenance and repair expenses for a logging truck or having equipment in that industry be considered. So having that allowed as an eligible expense, but also the strong understanding from this group or opinion of this group is let's not narrow down the scope too much so that we don't inadvertently become unable to fund a really impactful project that we can't envision now. So think about what's allowable, but don't make that allowable list so narrow and restrictive that something else that is going to imagine comes in. We talked about how there's no low interest loan programs for forestry in Maine right now. So looking at whether it was a down payment grant, or even a low interest loan for forestry. So if someone needs $200,000, but we can only offer 50,000, even if that's a loan that's a low interest, that would help their overall interest and expense accessing that money. So there still was, you know, interest in a loan that we didn't do a grant or blend, because both would be impactful. And then definitely keep tariff relief in TA as an eligible expense. And we talked about one TA expense might be that maybe hasn't been considered yet is if an applicant hires a grant writer to write their application, they would have paid for them, but allow that to be an eligible reimbursement, even if it happened before. So it's a little tricky in the state government about expenses that occur before the contract, but if we can walk through that. The group really thought that we should have one RFA and have customized questions so that the down payment would be an eligible expense and an infrastructure grant would be an eligible expense. You might have a couple questions of if you're asking for down payment funds, you ask these two questions. If you're asking for infrastructure, you might answer these two questions, one RFA, one application process. We talked some about targeting underserved communities that are likely unfamiliar with grant application processes. So the group wasn't opposed to reserving funds for TA for that reason. What we also talked a bit about, there are low cost, not just SCORE, that is one example, farm credit, a really specific intentional warm handoff or train the trainer approach where we're training service providers that are low cost at this point. So not against reserving some money, but also would be in agreement with really being more intentional about the low cost options or free options.
Thank you. Is there anyone in that group that wanted to add anything? Seeing none. Is there anyone on the board who strongly objects to anything that they've just heard from Michelle?
I would object to maintenance costs.
And tell us why, please.
Pardon me?
Tell us why, please.
Maintenance is
an endless proposition, and I'll just use the one district. I mean, you could effectively say anything in your business is effectively maintenance, so. And you can't, you know, in a snapshot in time, you can't predict what maintenance is going to look like. So it doesn't make an investment in your business, and I don't think that's what the intention of this fund is to do, is to help with infrastructure.
Actually,
Okay,
I just want to say something. I think that the intent of that comment was more along the lines of, if a logger has a piece of equipment that has broken down out in the field and they can't get working, like they need it to be fixed so that they can get back into business. That way, you know that that machine needs maintenance. It's not. Wow, I'm doing a terrible job explaining this.
I think it was part of the conversation, what you're saying, so that it is something, so that if you had, I understand completely what you're saying, Dana, the same thing on the farm for us, right? Like anything could break down at any given time. But the way that I took the conversation we had was more like, there's a large piece of equipment, whether it's that there is a sawmill that is not currently running, and by fixing some things that are broken in it, perhaps that maintenance to it could make it a now back online viable business. So maybe it's termed incorrectly as maintenance.
Yeah.
Infrastructure upgrade,
Yeah.
okay,
but to me, that's.
yeah,
okay.
Yeah,
to me,
infrastructure
it's
upgrade.
The slippery slope. Yeah, if it's an infrastructure upgrade, that means you're kind of buying a new saw. You're not just getting a mechanic and fix it. It's just, like Dana was saying, basically an operating expense, that's opening up the slippery slope. But then we should allow anything on your P and L statement, you know, annual operating expenses to be allowed. Even meeting the spirit of the statute.
Okay.
Wordsmithing maybe,
Well, I think as we spoke in our group, and I won't go into that yet, but I like eligible expenses listed without talking about what's ineligible, because you might get an application that has something in it you hadn't thought of, that the group would score and say, this is an okay use for this fund. So what Dana started off by saying is it can't just be maintenance, because that's just too open-ended and broad. And so while we wouldn't say maintenance is not eligible, we do know that if it were to become eligible under an application, it'd have to be for a very specific set of reasons, which addresses, I think, what Nick's saying about it can't just be, I'm hiring someone to fix my tractor, and therefore this fund applies. Because I'm not sure anybody would think that'd be the case. Unless I'm wrong about that. So. Okay, group 2. Director?
So I guess I'm going to report on the conversation as I heard it. I don't want to imply that there was consensus or agreement on these points.
Okay.
The group weigh in. But you know, in opposition to something I think the group 1 said, I heard an idea that there be 2 separate RFAs, one for forest products, one for ag and food. So that the two that those can be scored, and different kinds of things can be valued in each one. There was also a conversation about if there were 2 RFAs, or even if there were not, do we define before applications come in, a pot of money dedicated to forestry as it looks in the bond, and a pot of money dedicated to food and agriculture? Some people thought that was the right way to go. Other people thought, well, even if we've got 2 RFAs, let's see what comes in and somehow value the pods based on the application. 2 ideas. But I do think there was consensus that it would be fair to prioritize different things in those different sectors, and that would be okay, and that might be difficult to accomplish with a single arm.
Okay. Did your group discuss what could or should be prioritized in those different areas or not? I mean, we can have that discussion together, but did that come up at all? What should be
Not in
prioritized?
any detail.
Okay, thank you.
I would say. But just a recognition that there are very different economic sectors with very different needs.
Yes.
Okay, so topics of conversation. That there was not, it's not a decision, not a consensus. Should nonprofits be eligible? Nonprofits are one of the board. So that was an area of discussion. Should there be an income minimum or some kind of qualification that something is kind of a concern or not? Should there be an income cap? Are there certain kinds of, would businesses be too big to compete for this funding? Etc.
Oh, sorry. Find me.
And there was pointed out that on the proposed list of eligible entities, processors, distributors, aggregators, shared use spaces were not necessarily, certainly in the food space, were not necessarily named, and there was thought that they should be. And I guess the one other note I have here is, that the idea that there were no necessarily eligible uses that folks wanted to rule out yet. But the idea of the application itself be simple and flexible and allow people to make their case for why their use should be.
Thank you, Director. Anyone from that group want to weigh in? Nick?
Yeah, I know we looked at food retailers. And questioned like, we don't want Hannaford's to be applying and almost was questioning should food retailers on your slide be taken off. Though, is the Board of Diversifying Beyond programs like AI.P where retail facilities on a farm were not allowed? We would like to see like, retail. We would like to see this
Like-
fund be allowable for retail.
So I think we'd have to define what retailers are.
Yes, or retailing by a food producer sort of. The other thing our group talked about a little bit was aquaculture, fisheries and marine.
Hmm.
And they seem to be leaning towards, yes, aquaculture is as eligible. But in the meantime, this is now just my extending beyond, I wonder, isn't that a separate department from VAC?
Yes.
Yeah.
So actually, I retract anything I said. I currently think that aquaculture should not be allowed, because they're not under VAC yet.
There used to be another not. So,
Does it matter if they're not, I mean, we had this discussion,
Yeah.
but I guess that was the bigger question is, does it matter if they're not? I mean, I think there's not a lot of restriction.
Michelle?
Thought on, the retail location for an on-farm or a smaller retail facility, RFSI excluded that as an eligible category, but there's a lot of definition and language of how the USDA defines that, so it's just something to look at. If we did want to be more specific about allowing that, it was unallowable, therefore defined, that could be pulled in, the group wanted to go that way.
So let me ask this question, since I'm not familiar with the language that you just, and can you RFS?
Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure Grant, so it was the USDA administered by the ACF.
So I won't ever be applying for these grants. I'll say that now as a member of this board. But let's just say that a farm stand like my own exists in the world, and it wants to not just provide raw, non-refrigerated products to its consumers, but there is a need in that community for people to be able to purchase yogurt and eggs and things that need a refrigerator. Would the previous grant have disallowed for the purchase of a refrigerator for that farm stand?
It's the restriction, not a Maine Department of Agriculture restriction, that anything that a consumer could touch was unallowable. So they defined
Okay.
that as market available. So you could buy a freezer for only your staff to reach in, grab the blueberry pie, pass it to the consumer. But if the consumer was allowed to grab the yogurt or the blueberry pie for themselves, not allowable.
Okay.
So only middle of the supply chain was allowable. So they defined the next.
So would we want our fund to disallow for a farm stand like that to be able to apply for a $3,000 grant to buy a display refrigerator?
No, we want to.
Right,
It's a-
and would-
As well, disallow.
I'm
Any
not
type of
aware.
retail.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it did.
I would
So,
go-
two major grants for farmers over the past 3 years that disallow.
For
any
that.
type of Retail disruption. I think this one needs to allow.
Okay.
Retail.
Point taken, Marada.
I would go further. Think it's like probably one of the best places we can invest in the agriculture sector to benefit consumers and a diversity of producers is on farm retail. I think it should be one of our top priorities.
So on-farm retail, according to Marada, should be one of our top priorities, and therefore, would that then fit the definition of retail outlet? For the purposes of our own conversation, is that a food retailer for the purposes of this discussion?
Happily not engaged in the regulation of these businesses, but it is typically we call that like on-farm retail operations.
Okay.
There's a definition for that, so you could, if the recommendation was to remove food retail or to avoid the hamburger
Yep.
or whatever, to swap that from retail would be allowable.
Okay. On farm or on premise or on, maybe it's not a farm, maybe it's, well, anyway, we'll get to that a little bit later. So you asked us a couple of questions that we'll have to answer as a group. Should there be income minimum, or how does one prove that someone deserves, for lack of a better term, this money? An income cap, I suppose that these are criteria that we should decide at some point when we make the design. So those were actually really good questions. Did anyone hear anything that they totally objected to from the director? Dana?
I have one to add.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so I didn't hear any objections, so that's good. Go ahead, sir.
So we also, Craig alluded to this, we had a discussion about who would be an eligible entity in this first go
Yep.
around versus long term.
Yep.
Should it just be for startups or not? I apologize. Should it just be for existing businesses that have already been in existence and have collateral? Or should startups be eligible?
Okay.
So we had quite a discussion about that. My perspective was that this first go around is so small and so surgical that from the forestry community, again, goes back to that discussion of, are there separate RFPs? Is there a specific line of this amount of money is for ag, this amount of money is for forestry? But my perspective was it should be for existing businesses that have collateral, have skin in the game, have a risk proposition that they can provide versus startup at this point in time, not to preclude them in the future, but just from the perspective of we have a rounding error of
Mhm.
$500,000.
And a related question is, did your group discuss whether or not you prioritize or make ineligible people who have already received funding from some other program that the state runs?
We did not talk about that.
Okay, thank you. Lily,
Okay,
our group.
so the third group also discussed about whether aquaculture should be eligible for FPIF funding. And it was noted, like structurally, agriculture and food systems fall under Title VII, whereas marine resources and aquaculture are governed by Title 12. So structurally, it's already separate, and we kind of alluded to that earlier. But, back to the senator's comment about not making everything ineligible by saying all the no's, there may be at some point somebody who's processing, you said crab meat or
I
something.
did say that.
So, it's nuance. So we recognize that's a nuance. So we also don't have like the full answer besides just saying structurally they're governed differently right now. So that might be our answer right there for now. So we did talk about that. We talked about how AFPIF should focus on kind of like opening up bottlenecks in Maine's food systems and supply chains, and improving infrastructure that strengthens local food access and economic resilience. I think we're all on board with that as well. We also asked about, again, making sure that AFPIF is nimble and responsive to current events and current needs. Should we prioritize sectors in crisis at this time, particularly food and agriculture, given current food insecurity? We want to make sure, though, that we don't leave out the forestry businesses as well. So maybe Craig's group and what they were talking about was helpful to think about what is the breakdown or a split, or do we just wait to see who applies and then sees how we prioritize? So something for the group to talk about. We want to make sure to ensure that the grants do produce kind of visible, meaningful results that can help build support for future bond funding, helping us tell that story of Mainers feeding Mainers or Mainers helping Mainers. And we do think that small, high impact grants is a practical way to demonstrate success. We talked a little bit about home kitchen manufacturing kind of similar to I think farm stand, that idea of like the small businesses and local kind of food security. In the future, we also want to think about no interest or low interest, no cost loans. And just that the first round of funding can be used to help test and support APEF structure, build confidence in AFPIF. Well, what I like to say is laying the groundwork for kind of a larger, more diverse financial tools in the future. Yeah.
Thank you. Is anyone else from this group wanting to add anything to the discussion?
Yeah, I guess.
Amy?
There, to build off of the things that you said, just to provide a little more context, you talked about the importance of sort of having meaningful results and some more stories than we already do have for, like legislative support and capitalization. I asked the question if we should just like, if there was a benefit to spending now at all, or if we should wait to see what we have and be really thoughtful about building the fund, and just not rush. So, and there's, my group made a really good argument for spending now, but I also feel like we just want to be really thoughtful and use this in the most impactful way, be innovative, I love your word surgical, that's what we would need to be, especially with this amount. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out there. Because I don't know that we have to. There are other monies for crisis and business resilience in like the ECP and so forth. So I just wanted to make sure we're sort of thinking about using this as a proactive way to build infrastructure. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about whether or not there should or could be like a set aside either in the grants or the down payment proposal for like helping food financing. For expanding, say, on-farm retail or getting food into underinvested communities, as is the purpose of it. So we talked in that context a little bit about pulling other CDFIs. We're not the only one in because they, in the Development Corps and Core Directions, Community Concepts, they cover the whole complex of the whole state and work with communities and see the advisor can conduit getting capital to rural communities. So if there's down payment, that could be an option to break down the terms even more. And I also have just mentioned so that it's out there as context for people that there's authority, just as the Treasury has authority, state treasurer has the authority to invest in fame at below market for the ag loan. There's the authority to invest at 2% in CDFIs directly, and then we turn around and lend that. So we're
paying that back, but we're bringing down the interest rates on loans and very low, to low and flexible terms. So I feel like it's just good to think about that and know that that's out there, especially if we do a down payment, option. That could make it even more appealing, so you're not adding debt service onto, on businesses. But to Dana's point, I think it's really important that they do have, we know that this is a but-for project, but for the fund. And we know that they have, like commitment and investment, you know, like a commitment to the, going forward. So, I'll leave it there, but I just wanted to sort of add that on. We had a very robust discussion. Good.
Thank you, Amy. So has anyone heard, yes, Director Cormier?
Just wanted to emphasize that we talked about, this is about underserved communities and, whether forestry or ag, it's not only individuals or sole proprietors, but it's about businesses that employ these underserved communities too. And that's part of the equation.
There.
I just wanted to make sure we're being really clear about how we were thinking about the down payment match opportunity. And we had a little bit of a discussion that Michelle started to characterize that in the slide, we talked a little bit about this being a down payment match that could serve as collateral. And when we really parse it apart, collateral and match are two different things. So collateral is an asset basically tendered for security, right? And then a match is basically a cash infusion to a business so that they can match it with their additional funds to unlock financing via a down payment. So at the end of the day, that down payment match instrument really sounds like a grant. So is there a way that we include down payment match as, rather than its own standalone RFA or its own standalone grant program, it's just an allowable use?
Yeah.
And to this point that Amy was, I think, trying to make, tell me if I'm wrong, it also, if down payment match is an allowable use within a project budget, there's a broader feasibility narrative about what that project was intended to do that is not just, I'd like a truck, right? So I think that
Right.
de-risk what we're talking about.
Because the money's still, sorry, go ahead, Nick.
So that reflects, I think, what our group kind of towards with that, looking at that down payment grant idea as just an allowable use.
Yeah.
And if I recall from the AIP application, it's in the budget narrative, there's the column for where you could say, this is what you want the grant money for. But then there was a column where you could put in, if you're putting in your own assets, cash, stainless steel tables in your facility, whatever, but then also if you're getting outside. See a place for that, but also, just trying to be flexible and simple.
Yep.
So I think this idea of a down payment grant could just live within one month.
Murata.
It does raise an interesting point that we didn't discuss at all. Maybe today's not the right day, we can take that on a future discussion, but separating the down payment grant from the idea of a pilot pool a little bit, and to say like I think it makes a lot of sense in the future of this fund to have creative instruments that we are trialing to see what the appetite for them is and to see what the impact of them could be. And this goes back to one of my soapboxes I always get on, which is there is a role for innovation at every step of everything that we do.
Yep.
And I think that the idea of having a pilot has merit. Maybe this isn't the time or the place or the specific project, but I don't think we should throw the idea of setting aside a small amount of money to try something out of our fund. I think it's a really smart thing to do, especially the fund itself is an investment
Yes.
in our sector, and doing something like a pilot is an investment in the investment.
Correct.
So,
Can I really quickly?
You may.
So that's a really good point, and it's something that came up in our group as well, and the thought process that we went through was we could set aside money for something new that we aren't sure if there's enough demand to support, or we could keep it all as one pool, these general infrastructure grants, put it as an allowable use, and then if nobody wants a down payment matching grant, those funds are still right there for the other uses. So it goes back to this idea of you can innovate the instrument or you can innovate the use. And in this case, because of the level of capital allowable or provided, I think innovating the use is a safe bet to keep that money flexible.
Thank you. That's a great segue into the fact that it is 2:35 and we're supposed to have consensus. And so, we can extend a little bit into the public comment section because the last follow-up is 20 minutes long. And so we'll spend another 5 or 10 minutes just talking amongst ourselves. But this leads me to believe strongly that we will have to meet in November. But the takeaways that I'm hearing are, we probably ought to determine now if we're going to focus our consensus on a pilot program of $500,000 and then have a separate consensus on the design of more money coming in because it's capitalized further. What do people think about that? We have to start somewhere. We're trying to get something out that's like, this is what we're going to do.
Would help our discussion considerably. It's everything is like multifaceted when we're talking about the 500,000 in the general fund. So I do think that separating those two for the purpose of conversation and making sure they align at the end would be a good move.
Okay. Anybody object to us spending not necessarily the rest of this meeting, but when we meet in November, trying to figure out the $500,000 pilot grant program of this fund?
If it goes or if it doesn't, or if it's wrapped into the bigger or both process related questions.
Well, I'll ask the question, do you believe we should have a pilot of $500,000 or should we not spend this money at all until we're more fully capitalized, as Amy has suggested?
You know what happens with the bond.
Sarah?
I was going to say that I appreciate that caution because that tends to be how I look at things. But I also appreciate that Emily gave us this timeline because what your comment made me think was, where'd that timeline go? And look at it. So for almost 3 years now, we've had this money sitting here and had to build this group and have all these discussions. So I think in my thought is that if we do take this and we do move forward and do a pilot, it's a good faith to show we did this. We learned a lot of things. We spent the money you gave us. We need to do more.
Yeah.
That's my perspective.
I would agree with that perspective, but I just want to hear from other folks.
No disrespect, but kind of surprised, today, because I thought 2 meetings ago, we'd already decided, yes, we went forward with what we're calling round one.
Yep. But at any point in time, we can reconsider. So I just want to make sure that we're having a transparent, open conversation with each other and the public about it. So it sounds like we should at least focus.
But let me.
Go ahead, Dana.
If I could.
Yeah.
So, the bond discussion petered out at the end of the legislative session.
Correct.
And many of us had no clue that it was gonna happen. So now it's come forward again, and now the administration is solely behind it. And we didn't have that in June.
Correct.
So that's new information
Mm-hmm.
of prioritization, availability of funding, legislative process, gubernatorial support. That's a whole other discussion that we weren't privy to during our prior meetings.
Correct.
So, yes, to Nicholas's point, we decided, we want to get something done.
Mhm.
Absolutely. But now we have a whole other potential situation that could or could not happen. And I think to Amy's point, it might be beneficial for us to wait to see what happens with the legislative action on the bond. If legislative action doesn't occur, there's no consensus, there's no 2/3, it does not go to the voters, we gotta move forward. If it does, and knowing the history of bonds from the voters, I would say wait, because we just had a great discussion about, okay, what should we do right now based upon what we have? What can we do? And there are many things that probably should wait until there's a larger pool of funding, and we're gonna spend a lot of time just trying to dissect this very surgical conveyance of a small amount of funding versus what can be done in a bigger pool. So now that we have this bond situation at hand, I would wait and see what the legislature does. Frankly, that's where I'm at.
Anyone else have any thoughts?
We have the commissioner on Zoom.
Commissioner Bill? Yes, Commissioner's hand is raised. Welcome
Yes.
back.
Thank you. I've been here listening in. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just gonna add in, I just reinforce what Emily was saying, and I think what you, Senator Hickman, said at one point too, bonds are uncertain. It is a lot of work to get a bond through. I know there are going to be other bond requests. I like to remain hopeful for the outcome of this department bill, but there's no certainty as to what will happen on the other end. And the other thing I will say is that I have found in the last several years that I've been with the department that when we are close to or have run out of money, the legislature is much more likely to, vote to allocate or vote to refund a program. So I think if we have $500,000 sitting here, what we will find is that it will be a harder uphill sort of effort to get additional funds. If we've spent those funds and we say we're out of money, but look at the demand, look at all the applicants that came forth and said that they really wanted to access this program, we will have a much stronger argument.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments on that? Caroline? Thank you, Sarah.
I think, following that point, I think the 2023 intention of the legislature was for the funding to be spent.
Right.
And not saved. Thinking about the legislative history, I wasn't there, but.
That is correct. And we just didn't capitalize it as much as we would have liked. I mean, we did find out with a previous grant that there was so many more requests than we had money available for. And as I said in our group, just for the whole group, and Murata sort of pointed it out as well, it's $500,000 could fund a lot of micro grants for a lot of on-farm home kitchen producers who are doing their best to create resilient local food communities that we're going to need a lot more of now that we know in order for us to meet our ending hunger by 2030 goals, in order for us to meet our statutory requirements for food self-sufficiency and food sovereignty, in order to help implement to the extent that we can a right to food in our Constitution, we've got to be able to feed ourselves more because we can't depend on federal funds to do that. They've been cut and they will probably remain cut for the foreseeable future. And this is an opportunity for us to say, what can $500,000 do for our food economy? And what can it do for the forestry economy? I'm not sure, but I think we should design a program right now that allows for people to apply to get some help to build that, to put that refrigerator in their on-farm store, or to get the bigger piece of food processing equipment so they can take something that they are only producing for direct-to-consumer transactions to a bigger audience or bigger market. And this money was allocated for us to spend, and if we don't spend it and we wait, we'll just be back to where we're started. Because as hopeful as I am about a bond, I also know it's really tough to do. 2/3 of a vote in an election cycle has never been an easy lift in the legislature. Although I do think that the crisis that we're looking at will help to get us there. If we were to go forward with a pilot program of $500,000, do we want a separate application for food and forestry, as has been suggested in one of the groups? Separate application for the sectors. The food and forestry sectors are separate. And Sarah?
Would that, sorry, I raised my hand before my thought was fully formed. Would that require different committees to look at those grants? Versus?
Amongst us, you mean?
Yeah.
That,
Review those applications?
anyone want to?
And is that, okay?
Feasible?
So
Really?
I can tell you from my interaction with our awesome advisory board, I cannot imagine everybody having enough time to review like 100 or 200 grants here at the table, because it's hard to even get an email response from folks. So I think what would happen is the department would, through our technical evaluation committees, be able to, and Claire, you can also maybe jump in, would kind of, do 1 or 2 rounds to get into a more focused grants, and then we would see how the advisory board would come on to make final selections. But I cannot imagine, does anybody here have time to review 100 grants yourself?
Some organizations like the Maine Technology Institute uses something called a tech board. So they have industry experts, basically they have a stable of industry experts for their different target sectors. And when applications come through that have some sort of technical expertise requirement, in addition to being evaluated by agency staff, they also go to the tech board. So if we got a forestry sector application that had some like requirement for outside expertise, we could consider having some external body to pull from. But again, it's the question of like being able to find the right people who have the time that can do the thing. But that's one model where you use a tech board.
Caroline.
Is, the question about the two applications, is that an administrative question or a policy question? And, or is it possible to have one application and they fork? Ag, you go this way, forestry, you go that way. I don't understand one versus two and what the intention of it is.
Well, I mean, I guess I'll jump in if I can, and we talked about it in our group, and I advocated strongly, we have separate applications. I think you have different economies of scale. We have an $8 billion forestry economy, we have a $3.5 billion ag economy in the state of Maine. So you've got different infrastructure, you've got different needs, you've got different scale. And so I think the decision-making and the amount of money that's available should be looked at differently.
Are you thinking of allocating, let's just say, 250 in forestry and 250?
That was where I was coming.
So if we do that though, I mean, this is a pilot program, so we're gonna be able to see who actually applies. So if we have 250 for forestry, but there aren't as many applicants for forestry as there are for ag and food systems, then we'll have unspent funds on that side. Does that make sense?
Yes and no. If you don't have as many applicants, that doesn't mean that the applicants that applied are worthy of funding. Just because you have more applications doesn't necessarily mean that one group should get more money over another.
So is your, I'm just trying to parse out some information, but are you worried that if we have it all lumped into one, that there won't be enough funds for forestry because there might be more applicants from ag and food, and that's why you want to have a separate?
That's part of the challenge, yes, but part of the challenge is you have very different infrastructure in two different places, and I think it requires different scale. I think it has different business opportunities. We even got into, should it be existing businesses versus startups? And I think from our perspective on the forestry side, at this point in time, based upon the markets we have, we're not really interested in funding startups. We don't have enough markets for the wood that's out there. So why do we want to have more companies get in, to further deplete the prices that are paid? I think that's the challenge.
The segmentation of the funding pools, I think, started from the notion that it would be very difficult to evaluate a forestry application and an ag application for the same amount of time. It's so different. It made sense to split all of that stuff.
Okay.
So that was the motivation.
Can I actually call out Michelle for a second?
Well, she has her hand raised, so she had her hand raised anyway. I was gonna call on her, so go ahead. Jay.
So, for eligibility requirements for the Dairy Improvement Fund and the Agricultural Marketing Loan Fund, there were two different eligibility forms, but from what I understand, you have combined those now for simplicity, is that correct?
And really listening to, granted, it's just ag, food and ag, but the feedback of make processes less complex and make a one door in. What I was going to say is not to disagree with what's being said, but to offer an example of how it could be done a different way is, up until December of last year, evaluators had to read every single application that came in for an RFA. So if you had 100 applications and 5 reviewers, they had to read all and evaluate all 100. We are allowed to segment our evaluation committees, but have subject matter experts from forestry on an evaluation committee that's specific for the applications that come in. And we are allowed to have our scoring rubric reflect to get at the infrastructure and understanding of two different industries. We are allowed to have a scoring rubric that said for forest product applicants, we are looking at XYZ. For food and ag, we are looking at XYZ. The bulk of the scoring rubric could be the same, but you can segment some pieces to get at that and then have the subject matter experts either as evaluators or use the model that Claire mentioned that they're essentially a TA, a call to ask for clarification. So the group could consider that as well.
And I think that if we are at a consensus without any major objections that we're going to work on a design for this pilot of the $500,000, then we can get through the details of this at our next meeting. I do want to just open it up to the public because it's on our agenda to have public input. So at this time, if there is anyone who is attending on Zoom from the public who would like to weigh in for a few minutes on anything that you have heard us discuss, or any direction that you would like for us to take based upon what we have heard, now is your opportunity to do so. Tom, do you see anyone's hand? I do not, but my
No.
eyes are tired.
No hands raised yet.
Okay, great. Amy?
I really want to thank you for considering what I put out there. I really want to be a good group person, and I feel like I'm just elated that this is all happening and you're all spending your time committed to building this fund. So I just I'm so appreciative of that. I really just want to say I feel like we just want to be careful about setting a precedent, with our pilot. It is going to set a precedent for this fund that will start to define it. And so I just want to be careful. And I guess I like Claire, the way you said innovative use. And I feel like whether it's that element of innovation or meeting sector goals, meeting sector needs, getting at those bottlenecks, getting at those gaps that we know exist as criteria. So I won't talk anymore. I just felt like I really needed to say that.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
Director.
I've been reading the statute, so.
Yep.
Wanted to back up a step or two and just talk about this question of sort of the board as a grants committee. And I guess I want to acknowledge that I did a lot of the outreach to many of you who are here and recruited many of you on the premise that you would not have to be friends committee. And the statute, I would say, is a little bit ambiguous, but as I read it, the board is responsible for determining disbursements by, and then it gives a number of responsibilities that are sort of direction setting, facilitating strategic investments, fostering an environment that encourages innovation. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that the board could serve that purpose, but I also think this allows the flexibility that, for example, in other programs that we would have staff or expert peer reviewers looking at those, and there would be some kind of ratification by the board of those decisions.
Yep. Thank you, Director. Claire?
I appreciate what you were saying, Amy, about setting precedent through the first iteration of whatever it is this board and department do. I also just want to say, I had a mentor when I first started in economic development who was a mechanical engineer, and we were building a pilot. He said, the only thing you can be sure about a pilot is that it's going to be wrong. They're intended to be incrementally improved. They're intended to test hypotheses and help you gather feedback on what folks actually need. So I appreciate that when we do something, when we write it down, we are effectively putting a stake in the ground. And also it's really important that should a pilot be pursued, the framing is one that is focused on evolution, right?
Yeah.
It's going to change.
Thank you. Well, next steps and follow-up discussions is the final item on our agenda, but I just want to ask the board, following up with what Murata said earlier, is it okay? Are we in agreement, at least, that at our next meeting, we should focus on detailing with priorities, eligibility, innovative uses, a $500,000 pilot program for both the food sector and the forestry sector. I don't see anyone shaking their head no. I see all nod yes for the public. So that is at least what we'll have to work on for our agenda next time. But think about priorities within the sectors that we would utopia wish list want. I know what mine are, but I'll save those for myself for now because I don't want to try to influence the conversation. But people should be in this sector, the priorities are this, thinking about micro grants or maybe one grant that's $50,000. In the forestry sector, they are this. So if it's not new entities, it's only existing, then that's the priorities that should be discussed about that we would agree to for the forestry industry. And if it's folks who have never received any grants or anything from any other program in ag, maybe that's the priority. But we should really be thinking about priorities because $500,000 is not a lot, but it could make a huge difference for a very small business. So, Sarah.
When will we meet?
Okay, I was
Billy.
about to talk about that. Like, ready for logistics. Okay, so our next meeting is still online. It is on the AFIF website. It is for November 19th. I need to ask you all, can we commit to that time, November 19th? It's really important. Unfortunately, I know some people were sick today or other things came up, but we are missing some folks and it just makes it hard, I think, for us to move forward if we don't have quorum. So can we do November 19th? And it will be virtual, but if anybody wants to come to Augusta, I'll be there. We could always I'll be there. So you can always come to Augusta if you want, or maybe you're already there. But so November 19th.
Is it Wednesday?
It's a Wednesday,
It's the week
12:30.
before Thanksgiving, right? It's the week before. Is that the week before Thanksgiving? It's the week before Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's the week before Thanksgiving.
Okay, so can I see some like head nods or some thumbs up? Okay, great. And then December, we're gonna skip because I think December is pretty busy. Should we resume in January? Is that too soon? Is that, or I don't understand if
I think
that's,
we might, as long as we can meet in November,
We can-
and we'll have a whole 3 hours to try to get some consensus on a $500,000 pilot program for this fund. Let's see where we are. And if we are at a good place where we can take the holidays in the month of January off, then yes, but I think we can make that determination at the end of the November meeting. December is probably just out because it's out for me. I won't be available in December. It's the month I hibernate. Sarah.
At our November meeting, can we also maybe hear from the staff how this will be discussed at the ag trade show? And if there's a place for us as board members to be there?
yes.
We can certainly
We'll definitely do
put
that.
that on the agenda. Amy?
To like hear from, like somebody that would be something like a creative financing expert or like, an exemplar business from like each of the relevant sectors to talk about like what their road to financing was and what their bumps were.
Okay.
And if that would be helpful.
Yeah, and, okay, good idea.
Jay, did you see your hand?
Scratch my
Oh,
face.
all right. Sure, no.
Okay, so we're gonna see everybody November 19th virtually. I'm happy to meet with anyone in between that time. In fact, I might probably reach out to some folks for maybe to follow up on Amy's idea, et cetera. So
Mhm.
we'll be in contact over the next 3 weeks
Dana?
for sure.
Two things. One, if you get a calendar, invite out to all the citizens.
Yep, I will do that.
Time, we
Yep.
appreciate it. Secondly, have we had anybody from the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative in Vermont come talk to us? Anybody come talk to us?
Ellen Taylor gave a high level. We didn't get like the board chair talk about, like literally the tracks that they've done, the TA tracks, the way they pair TA with, the impact business grants and the smaller grants and, the creative mechanisms that they use. So that's. Was it in the report?
And then there's a lot of info in the reports from InCommon as well, but I don't,
But there were some very detailed, like, written reports sent out early about the different funds and the TA pairings and the.
Yeah, I feel like taking a deep dive into those reports surface like a landscape analysis, and if we could take a deeper dive into that, I feel like that would be really instructive as far as like getting into the design. And so that's why I was thinking either like, you know, somebody who's actively was involved in building those mechanisms at Working Lands, or at somebody from like you know, FDCDC with like Pioneer Valley Grows in Western Mass, or, you know, some of the places that have done some built some of these mechanisms for investment. Anyway, or even like just some of the businesses in Maine, like, and you could do like a financing expert and then have like a business or two, so that there's just this illustration of like, but for this fund, you know, they could have saved 10 years or whatever, you know, and they could have grown and they could have started, they could have had the capital if they needed. I mean, who's to say like Jeff can like do that too, but, yeah, sorry, Jeff, but you know, I mean, I could think of a few in Maine or regionally that like, you know, could, you know.
Well, let's remember that we should draw on our expertise as well. That's why we are actually at this table, which doesn't mean we can't hear from other folks. But I would say that we have to spend our time together on Zoom at our next meeting, coming to consensus on what this $500,000 pilot program for grants looks like. That's our priority. Nick?
I agree, would be my priority too. I mean, it was a great idea, but I feel like we've spent 6 to 9 months now together as a group hearing landscape analysis. Most of us have our fingers in the pie. We know that $500,000 can be spent, and it's going to be for production equipment and processing equipment and things that I think we've landed into some consensus today around small grants. And the statute gives us some pretty clear structure. I'm ready and eager to move forward.
Yes. And I'll just encourage board members to reach out to anyone to get expertise on anything in the meanwhile, so that whether or not it's an official presentation to the board, at least you are getting this feedback and this expertise from the folks that you want to hear from, that you bring back to us when we're making our consensus design recommendation.
For the Crown Games, should open book on creative financing, if anybody wants to get involved.
There you go.
No.
I mean, we're saying this is why we have a board of experts.
Happy to share.
Any other final thoughts?
I was just gonna offer really
Yes.
quickly, I remember this board was exposed to a veritable fire hose of information.
It was.
When it first started, so it makes total sense that if we wanna go back and revisit something like Vermont Working Land structure.
Well, even Lily, you had a chance to reach out, talk to them, visit with them.
Yeah, and liaise, I'll liaise, be the liaison and like the focal point kind of to,
Well, I mean, just coming into our next meeting.
right, yeah.
If you have a chance to meet with them.
Yep.
A couple of hours, say, okay, when you started, what was the pot of money? How did you break it down? I see where you are now, but how did you structure it? And that would just be telling for you that you could relay that.
Right,
information to us.
yeah. And I will be reaching out to folks individually for the next 3 weeks as too, just to fine tune that type of thing too. Great.
Perfect. Seeing no other thoughts, everyone have a safe journey back to wherever you're going next. And I appreciate seeing all of you in person. It's always better to do this work together because the energy is real. But I'm really honored to be a part of this group. So thank you, Director, for inviting me to be a part of this group. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. Bye, everybody online.